Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the tip calculator as written by Joel Murach in Murach's Android Programming 2nd edition. And I'm up to chapter 4, which talks about how to test and debug an Android app. Now, the first thing they mention is they go through what they call 4 test phases. And in test phase 1, what you want to do is you want to make sure that the user interface works correctly. If you've got an interface that you're going to be putting into both portrait and landscape mode, for example, you want to make sure that it looks good in both modes, that it works correctly in both modes, all right, etc. So you want to check both orientations, you want to check target screen sizes, you want to check it on different platforms. All right, but you're not checking to make sure that it's running correctly. You're just checking the interface. In step 2, you want to have a bunch of random valid test data. And you want to make sure, so I'd put a bunch of numbers in here. So I'd run this and I'd keep changing the amount in there, for example. All right. Right now, there's a, let's see, if we come in here and we put in this, and I never even tried this before, so this will be interesting. So minus. Notice it does not allow us to put in a negative number. But it probably lets us put in, which would be silly, because we're not going to have a bill that's going to be that big. All right, so we may want to come in and put in some code to even put a maximum in there. But again, we want to test the app with valid input data to make sure the results are correct. Then in step 3, you want to give it every bit of data you can to make it fail. Much better when you're testing your code for you to make it fail if you're creating an app than to put an app out there and let the general public find out that there's problems with it. Finally, you want to test it on every device, not just an emulator. You want to literally test it on every kind of device, every kind of tablet you can get your hands on, every kind of smartphone, anything else. And remember, it's one thing about Android apps today. They're used in all sorts of things. All right, there are Android apps that are in vehicles. There are Android apps that are in appliances, etc. So if you are writing an app for a vehicle or for an appliance, you want to check it in with the vehicle or with the appliance, etc. All right. You may or may not have noticed there's a couple things here. Again, is this stuff that important? All right. Where is it? Notice that right now I'm at 50%, but I can zoom in if I want to, or zoom back out if I want to. That can be important if I'm tweaking the program to make sure it looks the way that I want it to look. If I want to view something on a different screen size, there's the Nexus 4, and you'll notice, for instance, I can come over to here, all right, and change to a Nexus 7. Okay, so there's a lot of different things I can do there. I already showed you the orientation. All right, you can change different platforms if you want to. We can change different themes in here if we want to. Now, I'm going over this for completeness, but as you're learning it, I don't think it's worth doing this. I think you're best off just as you're learning this to concentrate on the fundamentals, get the code down, make sure the app works. That's me speaking. You may or may not agree with that. All right. There's 3 kinds of errors that you can get when you run a program. The first type of error is the easiest to find because it's a syntax error. It's an error in the rules of the language. You all know this, that if I go back to my main activity file here and I leave off a semicolon, I get that. Notice it says semicolon expected. It's showing me that right now there is a syntax error. All right, there is a syntax error in my code, and now I fixed it. Now, had I gone through here and for the percent down button, had I made both of, let's say I did a minus like this, but then I copied this whole thing down and I forgot to change that to a plus, that would be a logic error. So whether I press the the plus button or the minus button, I'd be going down. But that's an error in logic, and those can be hard to find. The last is a runtime error. And you'll notice, and I haven't even tried this, so I'm going to in just a minute. This can be the hardest one to code for. So let's see. Okay, let's run it in here. All right, let's have nothing in here. Okay, and let's try to. Okay, so you'll notice it handles there being nothing in there. And it's allowing us to do this, but it's not breaking. All right. When an app does encounter an error that causes it to end, the emulator or the device should display some kind of an error message, and it should display it in the logcat window, which is down on the bottom of the screen here. All right. So it'll be down in this area in here. When the error occurs, the logcat window typically includes the name of the exception that caused the error. All right. What you can do is you can trace the execution of an app. And they show you on pages 102 and 103 how you can use what's called logcat. All right. And typically when you use logcat, what you're doing, so if I wanted to step through a program, let's say that the program wasn't working, I could put logs in here that when I called a certain routine, a message would come up in here. I'm not going to run through that, but it's on pages 102 and 103 in the book. Toasts, which are kind of neat. All right. Let's see if we can put a toast in here. I don't want to break what I have, but you know, it's also nice to. So if I want to put a toast in here, the first thing I have to do is import android.widget.toast. All right. So that's done. And what I could have done is in my onCreate right here, okay, I can come in here and say toast t equal, not you gotta spell it right though, toast t, you can call it anything you want, equals toast dot make text this, and then a message here, in on create method, and then we have to say how long we want the toast to stay. So toast dot length, let's make it length long, dot show. So it doesn't like the, that should be a capital T. All right, so we've added that. Okay, it says incompatible types. Required Android widget toast found void. Oh, this show should be on the next line. So T dot show. I believe that that's correct. Now I'm going to run this again, and let's see if we get the message that comes up on the screen. So file, we'll do save all, stop the run, let's run it again. You know, you'll have to look fairly quick to see it too. Now let's see if we get a message down here when it comes up. There it is, in on create method. That's a toast. Boom. All right. And typically they're used, for example, if you've got a program in which you're able to remove files, all right, and you try to remove a file, then you'd want to say file was removed. So it's a three-step process. As you saw in the first step, we imported the toast class. In the second step, we created the toast object. In the third step, we called the show method. Okay? All right. Like most programming languages, Java has, if I click here, you'll notice, what is that? It's a breakpoint. All right, so a breakpoint is indicated by a red circle icon. When the application runs in debug mode, it stops just before it executes the statement in the breakpoint. All right, once you set a breakpoint, you can click on the debug button in the toolbar to begin debugging. It works much like the run button, except it automatically will stop when it gets to that breakpoint. You can also step into and step through code. All right, so when you run the app with a debugger and it encounters a breakpoint, execution stops before the statement at the breakpoint. In addition, Android Studio displays the debug window, which contains several other windows, and those are shown in the book on page 109. All right, and the best way to learn that is to just sit there and play around with it. Okay, and I'm not trying to not show you; I'm just telling you the truth here. 110 and 111 shows you how to set up an emulator. I've already done that with you. 112 and 113 showed us how to create an emulator that has a hard keyboard and a directional pad. I don't think that's the only time you probably want to use a hard keyboard would be when you're testing. Otherwise, you want to use the soft keyboard. All right, that's pretty much it. So next, we jump into section 2, and they say here on page 116, most of the chapters in this section expand upon the basic Android skills you learn in section 1. In chapter 5, for example, you learn more about getting input from the user and displaying output. In chapter 6, you'll learn about handling events. In chapter 7, you'll learn about controlling the appearance of the app. In chapter 8, we learn how to work with menus and preferences. And in chapter 9, we learn how to work with fragments. All right, so I'd like to go over each one of those in turn as well. Starting with chapter 5, which shows how to work with some other types of layouts. Okay? So we'll go into that very shortly.